Imagine this. You save up your hard-earned money, invest in your home, and take every step to keep your family safe. Then, out of nowhere, a neighbor and her entitled kid decide that your property is their playground. That's exactly what happened to me. I put up a pool fence to prevent accidents, then upgraded it with a smart lock so no one could just stroll in. Sounds reasonable, right? Wrong, at least to Karen, my nightmare neighbor. Karen's teenage son had gotten into the habit of sneaking into my backyard, using my pool like it was a public park. I caught him more than once, lounging in my chairs, splashing around, and even leaving trash behind. After warning him several times, I knew I needed a serious solution. That's when I installed the smart lock, secure, coded, and connected to my phone. The very next day, I got the shock of my life. Karen stormed over, furious, dragging her son along. She screamed at me for locking out children and making her son feel unwelcome. Then, in a move that still makes my jaw drop, she actually called 911 on me, claiming I was endangering kids by trapping the pool behind a digital lock. What followed was pure insanity. Police at my door, her son trying to play the victim, and me having to explain that I was protecting my property from trespassers. This wasn't about safety for Karen, it was about control, entitlement, and thinking her family had a right to my backyard. But here's the truth, when someone crosses the line, you either roll over or you fight back, and I wasn't about to let Karen and her trespassing son win. Asterisk, when I first bought the house, the pool was what sealed the deal. It wasn't the biggest or flashiest in the neighborhood, but it sat in just the right corner of the yard, catching the afternoon sun like a jewel. I imagined lazy summer days with my kids splashing around, barbecues with friends, and quiet evenings where I could dip my feet into the water while the world slowed down. That pool was mine, not a community playground, not a neighborhood free-for-all, but a piece of my home I worked hard to earn. It didn't take long before reality crashed into that dream. The first time I caught Karen's son in my pool, I thought maybe it was an accident. He was about 13, lanky, with a mop of dark hair that stuck to his face as he swam in circles. I stood at the edge, arms crossed, waiting until he finally noticed me. He froze, guilty as sin, water dripping off his nose. "Does your mom know you're here?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. He didn't answer, just scrambled out of the pool, grabbed his towel, and ran off through the side gate like a startled rabbit. I sighed, shook my head, and figured it was over. Maybe kids just tested boundaries sometimes. I didn't even tell his mother. I thought she'd handle it if it happened again, but it did. And again, and again. The second time, he had invited 2 of his friends over and they were using my pool like it was their personal water park. There were soda cans on my deck chairs, chips spilled on the tiles, and one of them had dragged my garden hose across the grass like it was some kind of toy. That time, I wasn't calm. I raised my voice, told them to get out, and made it clear this wasn't allowed. They laughed, one of them even splashing water toward me as if to mock me, before scurrying away. That night, I knocked on Karen's door. She opened it with that sharp, pinched expression she always wore, like the world was inconveniencing her just by existing. "Karen," I said evenly, "your son's been in my pool twice now. Today he brought friends. I need him to stop." Her lips curled into a smirk that made my stomach turn. "Oh, come on. They're just kids. What's the harm in letting them cool off? You've got such a nice pool, it's not like you're using it all the time." I blinked at her. I couldn't believe she'd said it out loud, like my property was somehow community property because she decided it should be. "It doesn't matter if I use it or not. It's mine. They can't just trespass into my backyard." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically, as if I were the unreasonable one. "You should loosen up. Maybe if you let the neighborhood kids in, you wouldn't look so uptight." I walked away before I said something I'd regret. But that night I lay awake, thinking about it. Her words burned in my head. The way she dismissed me like I was selfish for not wanting strangers' children or not in my yard. I started worrying about liability. Too, if her son got hurt in my pool, it wouldn't matter that he was trespassing. It would be my problem, my insurance, my nightmare. So, I decided to make a change. The next weekend, I had a professional install a tall fence around the pool. It was sleek, black metal, sturdy enough that no kid could just climb over it. At the gate, I added something I had been meaning to try for a while, a smart lock. It connected to my phone, kept a record of every time it was opened, and only worked with my personal code. It was modern, safe, and exactly what I needed to protect my space. When the fence went up, I felt lighter. My backyard finally looked like it belonged to me again. My kids could swim safely. My wife felt more at ease, and I finally stopped glancing out the window every 5 minutes to see if Karen's son had invaded again. For about a week, things were peaceful. But peace in my neighborhood never lasted long, not with Karen around. One Saturday afternoon, I was sitting on the patio with a glass of iced tea, scrolling through emails on my phone. The sun was warm, cicadas buzzed in the trees, and for a rare moment, I felt relaxed. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement near the pool gate. Karen's son. Again, he was rattling the gate, tugging at the bars, his fingers punching random numbers into the keypad like he was trying to guess the code. His face was twisted with frustration, lips moving as if muttering curses under his breath. I stood, set down my glass, and walked over. He jumped when he saw me, his hand still hovering over the keypad. "You don't belong here," I said firmly. His cheeks flushed, but instead of apologizing, he snapped, "You can't keep us out forever." That line, it floored me, not just because of the arrogance in his tone, but because of the US. He wasn't just speaking for himself, he was speaking for Karen. "Go home," I said, my voice low, "and don't come back." He glared at me, then stomped off, muttering something I couldn't catch. I watched him march down the street until he disappeared into Karen's house. My gut told me it wasn't over. Sure enough, the next morning I heard it, loud, angry, pounding on my front door. I opened it to find Karen standing there, her son beside her with his arms crossed. She didn't waste a second before launching into a tirade. "How dare you lock up that pool? What kind of neighbor are you? Do you know how humiliating it is for my son to be excluded? He's lived here his whole life, and you move in and suddenly he's not welcome. That's cruel." I stared at her, stunned at her nerve. "It's my pool. Karen, he's trespassing. I've told you before." She jabbed a finger toward my chest. "You're being selfish. Children should be allowed to swim. You're creating a hostile environment." Her son nodded, smug, like her words were gospel. I shook my head slowly. "No, I'm creating a safe environment for my family. Your son has no right to be in my yard. This conversation is over." Her face twisted with rage. "If you don't take that lock off, I'll make sure the authorities handle it." With that, she spun on her heel and stormed back to her house. Dragging her son behind her, I closed the door, my hands trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. The threat echoed in my ears. The authorities, over a smart lock on my pool fence. I didn't know it then, but Karen wasn't bluffing. The real storm was about to hit. The knock came only an hour after Karen's outburst. At first I thought it was her again, ready to scream at me some more, but when I opened the door, I was met with the sight of 2 uniformed police officers standing on my porch. The sight alone made my stomach tighten. Behind them, on the sidewalk, I could see Karen and her son hovering, her arms crossed like she was already victorious. "Good afternoon," one of the officers said. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of voice that was calm but firm. "We got a call about a possible child safety concern. Are you the homeowner?" "Yes," I replied, forcing my voice steady. "I'm the homeowner. What kind of concern?" Before the officer could respond, Karen piped up from the sidewalk. "He's locking children out of the pool. He's making it dangerous. What if a kid needed water, or fell in and couldn't get out? He's creating a hazard." I turned, staring at her in disbelief. "That's not what happened," I said, addressing the officers. "This is a private pool, on private property. I installed a fence and a smart lock because her son keeps trespassing." The shorter officer, who was scribbling notes on a pad, glanced at me. "Do you mind if we take a look at the area?" "Not at all," I said, stepping aside and gesturing toward the backyard. "Come on through." We walked around the side of the house, Karen trailing behind us like she was leading a parade. When the officers reached the pool gate, they inspected it carefully. The fence stood solid, the lock blinking faintly on the keypad. It looked exactly like what it was, a safety measure. "This is a good setup," the taller officer said. "Keeps kids out when they shouldn't be around water unsupervised." Karen scoffed. "Keeps my son out? You mean, he's been swimming in this pool for years before these people moved in. Now suddenly he's not allowed. It's discrimination against children." I clenched my jaw. "Karen, your son has been trespassing. I've told him to stop." "I've told you too." The shorter officer looked from her to me, then back again. "Ma'am, do you understand that if your son enters his property without permission, that's trespassing? It's not about discrimination, it's about property rights." Her face turned bright red. She sputtered, trying to form words, but her son tugged at her sleeve. He was smirking though, like this was all some kind of game. The taller officer turned to me. "Do you have any evidence of what you're saying? Any proof he's been on your property without permission?" "Yes," I said quickly, pulling out my phone. I opened the security camera app and scrolled through clips. One showed her son climbing over the gate before the lock was installed. Another showed him and his friends lounging in my chairs, tossing chips into the pool. And then there was the most recent one, where he was caught punching random codes into the new smart lock. I handed the phone over. The officers watched the footage carefully, their expressions giving nothing away. When they finished, they returned the phone to me and looked at Karen. "Ma'am," the taller one said evenly, "this man has every right to secure his property. The fence and the lock are not a hazard, they're a safety precaution. Your son cannot use the pool without permission. If he continues to enter this property, you could both be facing legal consequences." Karen's mouth fell open. For once, she seemed speechless. Her son muttered, "That's not fair," but the officer raised a hand to cut him off. "Life isn't always fair, kid. The law is the law." I felt a rush of relief so strong I almost laughed. Finally, someone was telling her what I'd been saying all along. But Karen wasn't done yet. She jabbed her finger toward me again, voice rising. "This is harassment. He's targeting my family. You think I'm just going to let him bully my son out of his own neighborhood?" The shorter officer sighed, closing his notebook. "Ma'am, this isn't harassment. This is a homeowner protecting his property." I suggest you let this go before it escalates further, Karen huffed, spun on her heel, and stormed off down the sidewalk, her son trailing after her with a sulky expression. The officers stayed a moment longer, turning back to me. Sorry you had to deal with that, the tall one said. Some people don't understand boundaries. If this happens again, document everything. Call us if you need to. You're well within your rights here. I thanked them sincerely. After they left, I closed my door, leaned against it, and let out a long breath. The adrenaline was still pumping through my veins, but at least I knew the law was on my side. Later that evening, I sat out by the pool with my wife. The sun was setting, streaks of orange and pink stretching across the sky, reflecting off the calm water. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Do you think she stopped now? She asked softly. I shook my head. Karen doesn't quit, but at least now the police know the truth. She can't twist this into something it's not. As if to prove my point, I heard the faint slam of a door across the street and caught sight of Karen in her window, glaring at my house like it had personally offended her existence. Her son stood beside her, peeking out through the curtains for the first time. Though they didn't look smug, they looked cornered. And in that moment, I realized something important. Karen wasn't fighting for her son's right to swim. She was fighting to control the neighborhood, to dictate who got to do what, and when. She couldn't stand that someone told her no that night. As I locked up and checked the pool gate one more time, I made myself a promise. If Karen thought she could intimidate me into backing down, she had picked the wrong neighbor to mess with. The battle lines were drawn, and though she had tried to use the law against me, the law had already made it clear she was the one out of line. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen never accepted defeat gracefully. She would be back, and next time, she'd come up with something even more outrageous than a 911 call about a pool lock. I just didn't know how far she'd be willing to go. For a few days after the police visit, the neighborhood felt strangely quiet, too quiet. I didn't see Karen in her front yard, no shrill voice carrying across the street, no smug glances from her son. At first, I allowed myself to believe the confrontation had finally ended things. The officers had made it clear. The pool was mine, the lock was legal, and her son was trespassing. Surely even Karen couldn't twist that into a win, but people like Karen don't retreat, they regrouped. It started small. One morning when I stepped outside to grab the mail, I noticed a pile of candy wrappers scattered across my driveway. At first I thought it was just kids being messy, but the next day it was soda cans. The day after that, an empty fast food bag stuffed with greasy napkins. It didn't take long before I spotted her son across the street, smirking while pretending to kick a ball around. Each time I bent down to clean up the trash, I felt his eyes on me, daring me to say something. I didn't rise to the bait. Not yet. The real trouble came a week later, when my wife rushed into the kitchen holding her phone. You need to see this, she said, her face pale. Karen had started posting in the neighborhood's community Facebook group. Her post was long, dramatic, and filled with lies. She claimed I had blocked children from accessing water during a heatwave, accused me of endangering minors with an unsafe lock, and even suggested I had threatened her family. The comment section was a storm. Some neighbors defended me, pointing out it was my property, but others, the ones who didn't know the whole story, chimed in with outrage. Well, that's heartless, one wrote. Who locks a pool? Another asked. Karen was painting herself as a martyr, a protective mother fighting against a cruel neighbor, and her son. She described him as a lonely boy who just wanted to swim. I slammed my fist lightly against the table. She's turning everyone against us. My wife squeezed my arm. Not everyone. Look, some people know the truth. She pointed to a few comments calling Karen entitled, telling her to respect boundaries. Still, the damage was done. Even walking down the street I could feel the stares, the whispers. Neighbors who once waved now looked away. That night, as I double-checked the lock on the pool gate, I heard a sound: faint splashes. The kind of noise only water makes when someone's in it. My stomach dropped. I crept around the corner, and sure enough, there he was, Karen's son, inside the fence, swimming in my pool as if nothing had happened. I shouted his name. He froze mid-stroke, then scrambled out of the water, his wet sneakers squeaking on the deck tiles. How did you get in? I demanded, stepping closer. He didn't answer, just bolted toward the gate. I ran after him, and that's when I saw the keypad hanging loosely, wires exposed. The screen cracked. He'd forced it open. Are you kidding me? I yelled. But he was already gone, darting across the yard and disappearing into the night. The next morning, I called the lock company. They confirmed what I suspected. The keypad had been deliberately tampered with. Someone had jammed it with enough force to break the mechanism. My stomach churned. This wasn't just trespassing anymore, it was destruction of property. I documented everything with photos and filed a report with the police. When the officers arrived, I showed them the broken lock, the pool camera footage of her son climbing over the fence, and the trash I'd been cleaning up for days. The officer shook his head. This is escalating. We'll have a word with his mother. If this keeps up, she could be facing charges for her son's actions. I thought maybe that would scare her into stopping, but Karen wasn't someone who scared Isabel. That evening, she showed up on my doorstep again, this time holding her phone like a weapon. "You called the police on my son," she screeched, loud enough for half the block to hear. I stood firm. "He vandalized my property. He broke the lock. I have it on video. He's a child," she shrieked, jabbing a finger at me. "You're harassing us, stalking him with your cameras, making him feel unsafe. You think you can bully us with the police? You've made the biggest mistake of your life." Her son hovered behind her, smirking again, his arms crossed. "Karen," I said evenly, "I'm not going to argue. Keep your son out of my yard. If this happens again, I'll press charges. Simple as that." Her face twisted with fury, and for a moment I thought she might actually lunge at me. Instead, she let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Then she turned and stormed off. Dragging her son with her, I closed the door, my hands shaking. My wife came over, worry etched into her face. "She's not going to stop, is she?" "No," I said grimly. "She's just getting started." The following days proved me right. Karen doubled down on her Facebook posts, spreading rumors about me to anyone who would listen. She claimed I was watching kids with cameras, that I was obsessed with keeping children out of the neighborhood pool, twisting the story until I sounded like some kind of villain. One afternoon, while mowing the lawn, I noticed two women across the street whispering and pointing in my direction. Another neighbor walked by with his dog but didn't return my wave. The sense of isolation was heavy, like a dark cloud hanging over my house. But I wasn't alone. A handful of neighbors reached out privately, telling me they supported me. That Karen had pulled stunts like this before with other people. That gave me some relief, but it didn't change the fact that Karen was escalating. The final straw came late one night, when I heard a loud crash in the backyard. I rushed out with a flashlight and found one of my pool chairs overturned, the cushion slashed with a knife. Spray painted on the concrete near the pool were two words: "Pool thief." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just kids being mischievous. This was deliberate intimidation. I stood there in the glow of the flashlight, staring at the damage, my jaw tight. Karen had crossed every line possible: trespassing, vandalism, harassment. This wasn't about a pool anymore. This was about control, about her refusal to accept boundaries. And I knew, right then and there, that the next move I made would decide everything. Karen thought she could scare me into backing down. She thought I'd eventually give up and let her son treat my pool like his own, but she was wrong because I was done playing nice. The morning after the vandalism, I stood in my backyard staring at the spray paint like it was a personal scar carved into my property. The red letters screamed "Pool thief" in jagged strokes across the concrete. Every time I looked at it, anger bubbled inside me, hot and sharp. This wasn't just a nuisance anymore. This was a direct attack. And if Karen thought she could scare me into submission, she didn't know me at all. I spent the day documenting everything. Photos of the slashed chair, the graffiti, the broken smart lock. I gathered the security footage and printed out the police report from the week before. I built a file thick enough to tell the story from beginning to end. By the time I was done, I wasn't just angry, I was ready. That evening, I went to the local police station in person. The officer at the desk recognized me right away. "Back again?" he asked with a weary half-smile. "Yes," I said firmly, setting the folder on the counter. "And this time I want to press charges. Trespassing, vandalism, harassment, all of it. This has gone too far." He flipped through the photos, nodding slowly. "This is pretty serious. With the spray paint, it's definitely criminal mischief. We'll open a case." For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I had control. Karen had crossed too many lines, and now the law was finally moving with me, not just shrugging her antics off. When I returned home, my wife met me at the door. "Well," she asked, her eyes full of hope. "They're opening a case," I said. "It's official now." She wrapped her arms around me, whispering, "Finally." But while I was taking the legal route, Karen wasn't sitting still. The very next day I woke to find my phone buzzing with messages. Neighbors, friends from down the street, even the mailman had forwarded me screenshots. Karen had posted again in the community group, this time doubling down harder than ever. "Beware of our neighbor." The post screamed in all caps. She claimed I was harassing children with cameras, that I was spying on her family, and that my obsession with the pool was disturbing and unsafe. She even implied I had screamed at her son in a threatening way, twisting the truth until it was almost unrecognizable. The comment section blew up. Some people still saw through her lies, calling her delusional, but others fanned the flames, demanding I take down the cameras or stop bullying a child. I felt my jaw tighten as I read each comment. This wasn't just annoying anymore. This was defamation. She was poisoning the neighborhood against me, painting me as a monster. That night, I sat at the dining table with my wife, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. "She wants war," I muttered. "Fine, she'll get war. Don't stoop to her level," my wife cautioned. "Stay smart." "I will," I promised. But it's time everyone saw the truth, so I made my own post.com. Measured, I uploaded clips from my security cameras, her son sneaking into my pool, breaking the lock, throwing trash. I included photos of the vandalism and explained the timeline in plain, simple language. This is what my family has been dealing with. I wrote, we have tried to handle this privately and respectfully, but the trespassing, property damage, and harassment have continued. This is why I installed the fence and smart lock. I ask everyone to respect that this is private property. Thank you. When I hit post, my hands were trembling. Within minutes, comments poured in. Some people apologized for believing Karen's version. Others expressed outrage at the vandalism. A few even admitted they'd had problems with Karen in the past. The tide was shifting, of course. Karen didn't take it quietly. She lashed back, claiming the videos were doctored and the vandalism was probably staged, but this time her words didn't land the same way. Too many people had seen the truth for themselves. The next day I noticed something remarkable. Karen was standing in her front yard, as usual. But instead of neighbors stopping to chat, they walked past quickly, avoiding her. One woman who used to gossip with her every morning barely nodded in her direction. Karen's face was like thunder. But the real blow came 2 evenings later, when 2 officers pulled up in front of her house. I watched from my window as they knocked on her door. She answered, clearly flustered, and after a few minutes of heated conversation, her son was called to the door as well. They stood there, listening to the officers, and though I couldn't hear the words, I could see the body language stern, authoritative, no nonsense. Karen's arms were flailing in protest, but the officers didn't budge when they finally left. Karen slammed her door so hard the sound echoed down the street. Later that night, I sat on the patio by the pool, the air still warm from the day, the water shimmering under the lights. My wife joined me with 2 glasses of iced tea. You think this will finally shut her down? She asked. I shrugged. She's stubborn, but now she knows the law is watching. She can't twist the story anymore. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, listening to the crickets and the gentle hum of the filter. It almost felt peaceful again. Almost still. I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't finished. People like her didn't just quit. They thrived on control, on drama, on making others bend to their will. But I had something now I hadn't had before. Proof, allies, and the law on my side. For the first time since this started, I wasn't on the defensive. Karen had underestimated me. She thought I'd roll over, that I'd give in to her screaming in her games. But instead I had drawn a line she couldn't cross without consequences. And while she was stewing inside her house, plotting her next move, I leaned back in my chair, sipped my tea, and stared at the locked pool gate with a small, satisfied smile. The war wasn't over, but the balance had shifted. And deep down, I knew the next move Karen made would decide how far this battle would go. For a few weeks the street was eerily calm. Karen didn't post anything online, her son wasn't hanging around my gate, and the late-night vandalism stopped. The spray paint had been scrubbed away, the broken chair replaced, and a brand new smart lock installed, this time with a reinforced casing and tamper alerts that pinged my phone instantly. Life began to feel normal again, and though I stayed cautious, part of me hoped the storm had finally passed. But then came the letter. It was tucked into my mailbox one Friday morning in a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a typed complaint, cold, formal, and filled with Karen had filed with the Homeowners Association, accusing me of creating a hostile neighborhood environment, blocking communal resources, and unfairly targeting her family at the bottom. The HOA board announced a mandatory hearing to review the concerns raised. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in my hands, my chest tightening. She's trying to drag the HOA into this now, I muttered. My wife frowned. Of course she is. She can't win with the police. Oh, she's hoping the HOA will do her dirty work. Part of me wanted to crumple the letter and throw it away, but I knew better. This was her last card to play, and if I didn't handle it carefully, she could twist the board against me. So, I spent the weekend preparing. I organized every piece of evidence, the photos of the vandalism, the police reports, the security footage, even screenshots of her wild Facebook posts. I built a timeline that stretched from the first trespass to the most recent confrontation. By the time Monday rolled around, my file was so thick it could have doubled as a textbook. The hearing was held in the community center. When I walked in, Karen was already there, sitting with her son in the front row. She was dressed for battle, arms folded, lips pursed, radiating self-righteous fury. Her son slouched beside her, headphones dangling from his neck, a smirk plastered across his face. The HOA board sat at a long table up front, 3 members, all middle, with that air of weary authority people get when they've mediated too many petty neighborhood squabbles. Karen launched into her speech first. She spoke with practiced indignation, painting me as a paranoid neighbor obsessed with keeping children away from communal spaces. She described her son as a victim of isolation, and accused me of weaponizing the police against him. The way she spoke, you'd think I'd spent months tormenting her family instead of defending my property. When she finally sat down, the room buzzed with murmurs. Some neighbors seemed swayed, nodding along. Others exchanged skeptical looks. The board turned to me. I stood, took a slow breath, and laid my file on the table. I'd like to present the full context, I began. One by one, I walked them through the evidence. The first trespass, the pool parties with her son's friends, the repeated warnings, then the vandalism, the broken lock, the spray paint. I showed the footage of her son inside my pool, the photos of the slashed chair, the police report documenting the damage. Finally, I read aloud the officer's statement confirming that the lock and fence were legal, standard safety measures. The board members leaned forward, their expressions shifting from neutrality to concern. By the time I finished, the room was silent. "This isn't about a communal space," I said firmly. "This is private property. I didn't buy this house to provide free entertainment for the neighborhood. I installed the fence and lock to keep my family safe. What I've dealt with since then is harassment, nothing less." Karen leaped to her feet. "He's lying. Those videos are fake. He staged the vandalism. He's obsessed with us." But her outburst only made her look desperate. One of the board members raised a hand. "Ma'am, please sit down." For the next 10 minutes, the board deliberated quietly. Karen fidgeted, whispering furiously to her son. I sat still, hands clasped, forcing myself to stay calm even as my heart pounded. Finally, the chairwoman of the board looked up. "We've reviewed the evidence. It's clear the pool is private property and not subject to HOA regulation. The security measures in place are appropriate and legal. Furthermore, the vandalism and trespassing documented here are deeply concerning. This board cannot and will not punish a homeowner for protecting his family." Case dismissed. Karen's mouth fell open. Her son muttered a curse under his breath. The room erupted into chatter, but I barely heard it over the rush of relief flooding through me. Karen stormed out of the meeting, dragging her son behind her. As she passed me, she hissed, "This isn't over." But I could see it in her eyes. It was over. She'd played every card she had. 911. Facebook, vandalism, the HOA, and each one had backfired. The board's decision was final. The neighborhood had seen the truth. The police had documented her behavior. She was cornered. When I walked out into the evening air, several neighbors stopped me to shake my hand. "Good for you," one said. "You handled that better than I would have." Another leaned in and whispered, "She's been a nightmare for years." Glad someone finally stood up to her. Back home, I sat by the pool again, listening to the soft ripple of the water under the lights. For the first time in months, I felt peace, not just the fragile calm between storms, but real peace. My backyard was safe, my family was safe, and Karen finally was powerless. Looking back, I realized the fight had never really been about the pool. It was about boundaries, respect, and the right to enjoy the home I'd worked hard for without interference. Karen's entitlement had turned something simple into a war, but in the end, she lost because the truth was stronger than her lies. I took a sip of my drink, leaned back in the chair, and let out a long, satisfied breath. The battle was finally over, and this time, it truly was.